Good morning. Welcome to Utah Faces and Places, and we've got our Monday show, which is the New American Review. We're so glad to have you all here, especially our co-hosts. We've got Orion Marler with us as usual, and we have our expert host. How do you like that title? Expert host.
I love it.
Joe.
It makes me feel very self-important, which is what I live for.
Good morning, Joe. Good morning,
We're
Paul.
told that we're too somber and we're too serious by our callers and those who tweet and those who send us Facebook messages and emails. So we're going to try to put on our party hats today and be a little bit happier. And what did you just say on the lead-in? We're happy about the
yes, yeah,
events.
we're happy about the tyranny. let's just fiddle while Rome burns, everyone. Passing out the fiddles.
Jonathan
Okay.
back there on the controls, and he looks happy.
He looks happy.
Jonathan, are you happy this morning?
I'm happy.
There we go.
Okay. Well, we've got a great show planned for you this morning. We've got, if you want to see the format for today's show, you can go to utahtalkradio.com. That's utahtalkradio.com, and go to the link that takes you to the New American Review show. And right on that page, we have today's program all outlined of what we're going to talk about. We never make it to everything. There's too much to talk about in one small hour. Also, if you want to listen to us on the internet, you can go to that same website, utahtalkradio.com, and you click on Listen Live. Unfortunately, the Watch Live is not there, but you can go to either Google Hangouts or to YouTube live streaming and watch us live. I hope you can. We're still trying to get one button to bring you there.
I think they carry us live at the local clown college as well. I think you can audit that class. No credit, but the information is priceless.
Now, for those of you who live here in Utah, in northern Utah, the temperature today is supposed to reach the mid-90s with a 20% chance of rain. A very slight chance. That's up from 10 yesterday, though. Maybe we could get a little bit relief in some areas. 20% of you. Is that the way it works? Is it 20% chance or in 20% of the areas?
20% of you gets wet.
Okay.
And we'll have weather all day.
We will have weather all day. How are you doing this morning, Orion?
I'm doing well for the shape I'm in.
Okay. Well, there are a couple of stories in the New American that really caught my attention. And, folks, that's thenewamerican.com. Go to thenewamerican.com. And even over the weekend, I saw 4 new stories that we are not going to have the time to get to today that are so eye-opening. I told Joe this morning, our expert guest, that, by the way, Joe Wolverton is a constitutional attorney, and he also teaches world government and I'm sure law as well. And he is a regular contributor to the New American, and we're so glad to have you with us here, Joe, and the knowledge that you bring, the experience, and your talents to help save what's left of the Constitution. And the goals of the New American, as well as the John Birch Society, is to limit the size of government and restore the rights that are protected by the Constitution. And I'm so grateful that you've pointed out in the past that they are not constitutional rights. What are they, Joe?
They are rights given to us by God that are protected by the Constitution.
Now, why does the Constitution matter? I think there are certain people in this administration that don't think the Constitution matters whatsoever.
That is true. The Constitution matters because it is a way for us, meaning the states. The states created the federal government in a contract that we call the Constitution, and it's a way for us to restrain the federal government. As I said in a speech just this past week, the Constitution doesn't tell the federal government what it can't do. The Constitution tells the federal government what it can do. That is to say, if there's a power isn't granted specifically to the federal government in the Constitution, the federal government cannot act in that area. And anybody who can read anything, any bit of news today, like I had the class you're talking about that I had on nullification, I would tell my students to open up the New York Times online, just go to newyorktimes.com, and find one story where on each page of the national section where the federal government is acting outside its constitutional boundaries, and you could find 3 or 4 on each page. Most of what they do is unconstitutional, yet we scream that we're living under crushing debt when about 88% of that debt would be eliminated if we would force the government to constrain itself to within its constitutionally defined powers.
And what does the 10th Amendment say?
10th Amendment says that any power not specifically granted to the federal government in the Constitution is retained by the states and the people, which if we paid attention to the 9th and 10th Amendments, we would not have many of the troubles that we have today. We wouldn't have the Common Core. We wouldn't have the end of the coal industry. We wouldn't have data mining of children if we enforced the Constitution and if we enforce the enumerated powers as well as enforcing our rights specifically guaranteed by the 9th and 10th Amendments.
Well, now I took a constitutional class, government history class when I was in high school, and another one when I was in college, and my minor was history. And I'm pretty sure there's a supremacy clause, though, isn't there, Joe?
That is the one thing that gets...
Now, see, I wanted to keep it humorous today.
You want to keep it... Well, there you go. And I'm going to, while I give this answer, I'm going to juggle, so we'll be fine. No, the supremacy clause is one of the things most commonly referred to by advocates of federal power, and they say that Article 6 of the Constitution says that any act of the federal government is the supreme law of the land and trumps state laws to the contrary. They forget the phrase that pays, Paul, and the phrase that pays is in pursuance thereof. Article 6 says any act of the federal government in pursuance of its constitutional powers is the supreme law of the land. It does not say any act of the federal government in defiance of its constitutionally defined power. There's a big difference between in pursuance of power and in defiance of those powers. And the Constitution clearly enumerates very specific powers the federal government has. And if it's not in it, we don't have to follow it.
And that segues us into our topics today, which we now have a total of a minute and a half to talk about in this segment. But we'll get what we can, and we'll carry it over into the next segment. First was a story that I read, and we're not going to have a lot of time to get involved in it. We can start on it, and that was a story that said United States military drones killed more than 30 people in Yemen, and they even targeted a school in one of the attacks. The other story that we're going to try to talk about in very, very close to that is an interesting one, and that is that a Colorado town is considering drone hunting ordinance, a drone hunting ordinance. Let's, in the minute we've got left, let's start to address what was this attack in Yemen, and why are we using drones to kill all these people overseas, and then eventually to have 30,000 of these drones in the skies over the United States.
Right. Why we did it is, according to the administration, we're hunting down Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula. They have asserted that Yemen is essentially the stronghold of Al-Qaeda in the Arab Peninsula, called AQAP. And they sent drones over, and in the past 2 weeks now we've killed approximately 37 people, 12 of which have been verified to be children. You talk about the school. And
now, were they Al-Qaeda terrorists as well?
Absolutely. They were Al-Qaeda terrorists. No, of course not. They were children in school, children at a medical center. We are indiscriminately murdering people in the name of safety.
Okay, well, we're down to our hard break, and we're going to cut this in 4 segments for YouTube today. We're glad to have you with us this morning, KHQN. Welcome back to the New American Review this morning, every Monday morning from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m. here on KHQN. And we've got with us our co-host, Orion Marler, and our professional expert host, Joe Wolverton. We're glad to have you with us to this night, Joe.
Thanks.
Listen, we were talking about these U.S. drone strikes in Yemen killing, what do you say, it's now up to 37 people, at least 12 of them confirmed to be children.
That's right.
Did these people have trials? Was there any opportunity for them to defend themselves? Now, I know I'm talking American law here, but doesn't human law also dictate that we don't go around killing little school children?
Absolutely. There's a couple of things, Paul, that need to be discussed on this that I want good conservative folks to understand, because as I go around traveling and doing radio shows and speeches, I'll have many good-hearted conservative Americans saying, well, we're hunting terrorists and they don't have the same rights. And so I want to make a couple of points. First, talk about this, the Yemen strike, one of the Yemen strikes. There's been several in the past few days. couple of weeks, actually. You know, we're talking about this man. He was interviewed by the BBC in the wake of one of these strikes, and he picked up his daughter from school, 8-year-old daughter, picked her up from school to take her to a doctor's appointment. They were standing in line outside the medical clinic waiting to get in and have her appointment when they heard the drones coming, and before they could blink their eyes, the hospital was obliterated by Hellfire missiles fired from a U.S. Predator drone.
The hospital.
It was a hospital, destroyed by a U.S. Predator drone. So the father grabs up his 8-year-old daughter and runs back to the safety of the school. While they're running toward the door of the school, another drone, a second drone, reduces the school to a pile of rubble. A chunk of concrete hits his daughter in the back of the head. She bleeds out and dies in his arms. And as he was crying to the BBC reporter interviewing about this, he said, "What did my daughter ever do to the United States? She's only 8 years old." Now, the problem is this. When we abandon our principles, we become no better than those who we are purportedly chasing. When we start killing children indiscriminately, then we have abandoned our principles, and we no longer are the shining city on a hill. We no longer truly represent liberty. You know, our founding fathers had a saying during the time of the War for Independence. In America, there is no king but Christ. That was their saying. Well, I cannot imagine that a country that claims to worship Jesus Christ would find any justification for murder, even collateral murder, of children in the name of protecting safety. And as you say, none of these people, not a single one of the people, none of the 30-plus people killed were ever given an opportunity to answer for the crimes they supposedly committed. And the Constitution, Paul, and this is something that, like I said, that I want good conservative folks to understand, the Constitution does not say no American shall be deprived of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The Constitution says no person shall be deprived of those rights. No person. Because our founding fathers understood that when it comes to rights, they are given by God. That every single one of us, whether you're an 8-year-old Yemeni, a 33-year-old Arabian member of Al-Qaeda, alleged member, or one of us, we are all the same in the eyes of our Creator and are endowed with rights by Him that cannot be taken away. And in our nation, we have said those rights shall not be taken away without the due process of law. But we have abandoned that completely. And now we go around indiscriminately, our president, every Tuesday. So tomorrow, when y'all wake up, think about this. When you're sitting there, enjoying your breakfast, watching your television, reading your news, our president is sitting in the Oval Office with a stack of flashcards every Tuesday. He and undisclosed members of his national security team go through these flashcards and add names to his kill list. And then at his sole command, Predator drones, or Reaper drones, under the command of the CIA or the military, are sent to assassinate those people whose flashcards were picked out of the pile. None of these people ever receive a trial. None of these people are even charged with crimes, much less receive a chance to answer for those. And then we have these people who say, well, we can't chase these people down. Well, I will remind you of the case of Osama bin Laden, who was public enemy number one for over a decade, and we chased him down. So if we can chase down Osama bin Laden, it would seem to me that if we have legitimate reason to believe, beyond a reasonable doubt, or even a preponderance of the evidence, that someone is threatening the safety of the United States or its citizens abroad, that we should be able to call that person to account for that and allow them to answer that. And if we find, Paul, that someone is demonstrably threatening the safety of this nation or its people, that person should be punished to the fullest extent of the law without mercy. But until that point, we must stay true to the principles that have kept us free And we must recognize that in America there is no king but Christ, and he would never authorize such acts.
Well spoken. I have a couple of questions for you, Joe, and one of them is about Hitler's regime and how the people of Europe, and especially Germany, overlooked the atrocities that they perpetrated against people that were opposed to their regime, and everyone looked the other way, and then when it was too late, they were the ones that were then the victims of the atrocities. Can we stand by and have it done to others while in a very short period of time, over the next year or two, we're going to have 30,000 drones over the United States, and are they going to then be eliminating the people that they say are a threat to this administration or to this country without impunity, without any questioning, without trials, without all of the things that our founding fathers stood up for and realized in an inspired way needed to be protected, God-given rights, and now they're just being thrown to the gutter. And I appreciate your portrayal of the fact that it says all people, not all Americans, have the right to have these God-given principles involved in their lives. If they're God-given rights, they're for all of his children, I assume, not just here in the United States.
That's right. We're not special in America in the sense that we have a set of rights given to us by God, rights that he denies the rest of his children. That makes no sense, and as a matter of fact would be a prideful thought to think that we somehow have the right to life, liberty, and property, and we're the only ones. If we truly, as conservatives, believe that our rights come from God, then we believe that all people on the earth are children of God, regardless of their religion. If we believe that, then using the transitive property, we would say that all people have the rights listed in the Constitution. And I believe they do. And I believe it's morally reprehensible that we chase people down. I do not want to take a step back in the protection of this country or the protection of its citizens abroad. But we need to take a step back in the sense that we need to restore constitutional liberty.
Well, now, Joe, if there were a Nuremberg trial held at some point in time, a Nuremberg-type trial, and we brought these people to justice, behind every one of those drones is a military person sitting in a trailer somewhere directing and watching what they're going to fire at. Where does the buck stop? Is the only one really responsible for this the military leaders or the president, or does a military man have the right to say, I'm not going to murder?
Well, we do. You make up a perfect point, and that is the example we have of Nuremberg. You had the Americans who, after World War II, when we were holding these people to account, we as the United States, the Allies, United States and Britain and Russia, refused to allow German Nazi soldiers to claim they were just following orders. We told them, and we prosecuted all of them and executed many of them, put many of them into prison for life without possibility of parole. And you can watch the events. Many of them are on YouTube. You can read the transcripts for free on the internet. And you can hear the prosecutor, the Allied prosecutor, saying, it is no excuse to say that you were just following orders. Because your shield, your protection against your action when saying you're just following orders, goes down at the point of immorality. When you're being ordered to do something that you yourself know, as a conscious, sentient being, is something that is immoral, then you should refuse to obey that order. When your superior orders you to round up Jews, line them up on the wall, and shoot on them for no other reason than being Jewish, you know that's immoral, and you cannot hide behind the I was just following orders. So if we're true to our principles, and we use that, where does the buck stop? Is the man whose hand is on the trigger firing those Hellfire missiles at that school and that hospital, is he responsible, or can he hide behind, if it's one of ours, do we allow them to say I was just following orders? Are those rules only for others and we retain for ourselves a different set of rules? Is that the moral fiber that we demonstrate in America today? Is that the sort of people that we are?
Okay, so folks, we're not going to be able to cover all this today, but if you go to thenewamericanreview.com, that's thenewamericanreview.com, and you search for a story, U.S. drones kill more than 30 in Yemen. If you do a search by topic, type in drones and Yemen, and you'll find the story and read that story, and you can get more information. There's a second story that we really don't have very much time for, but let's just mention it as we go. We've got to move on to the next segment. But however, what is this story about a Colorado town considering drone hunting ordinances, allowing their citizens to hunt these drones?
Yes, there was a city ordinance in the town of Deer Trail, Colorado, about an hour outside of Denver. One of the city counselors there proposed an ordinance that would allow citizens for $25 to obtain a drone hunting license. And then if any of the citizens were able to shoot down one of these drones once they go live over the domestic skies over the next year and a half, if any citizen with a license brings in the wreckage from a drone, they'll be rewarded $100.
Oh, my goodness. Now, how is it going with that ordinance?
Well, it tied, at the city council vote, it tied half for, half against, so it will be brought up again in November, where the citizens in referendum will vote on the ordinance, the drone hunting ordinance.
Learn more about that on thenewamerican.com. Type in drone in Colorado town and you'll find it. We're glad to have you this morning with us here on the New American Review with our expert Joe Worthington and our co-host Orion Martyr. Welcome back to the New American Review here on KHQN 1480, originating from Provo, Utah, and broadcasting throughout the world. And we're hoping that some of our friends overseas and those in Yemen and Afghanistan who we have injured or hurt will understand that we, the American people, love you, and we don't wish harm to you. A lot of you have been waiting to call in, and we've forgotten the whole show to give our 800 number. If you have any questions or comments for our expert here, Joe Wolverton, a constitutional attorney and a contributing author to the New American, our phone number, and I'll give it to you twice, so get your pens and your paper, or if you want a pencil, that's fine, right? We got to keep it some levity. Crayon, you bet. 1-800-776, Goodyear, 1913. Joe, what is Common Core?
Common Core is a set of standards enunciated by the federal government that states will have to implement if they wish to retain their Department of Education grant money. Simply put, their English, math, reading, history, pretty much across the board, the curriculum in states will now have to be adapted to reflect Common Core standards in order to maintain their federal funding, which schools in America are absolutely dependent now, because of our own unwise decisions, on federal money.
Now, I've read when Common Core first came out, there was a lot of discussion that, hey, this looks really good. The federal government's finally come out with something, but as the details came out, and the devil is in the details, the things that I've read are just it scares me to death, and I have a daughter who homeschools because of the public school situation. And this Common Core, when you look into the details of what the curriculum is, and they're starting out with math and some of the less troublesome areas like history and social studies and so forth. And even in those areas, there are so many blatant errors, mistakes. And so now as we go on, people who are supporting it initially are saying, hey, wait a minute, let's pull back. What is this all about? Who's behind it? What are they trying to accomplish? And what are going to happen to our kids? What is it that the federal government and those behind it are trying to do in bringing about Common Core? And why is it such a concern?
The other thing is that they're spending in some counties $29,000 per year per student, and they're not getting an education. And so there's so many things like that that are going on, and of course the government is subsidizing all this, and they have to get their check every month.
And they're using the fact that they're saying that the education system is inferior and it needs to be updated, and the education system and the education of our children, instead of being a local issue and a state issue, is now I guess this is just the federalizing, the nationalizing of education. Is that right?
Absolutely. But the question I have is, you say it being a state or local issue, why is the education of our children not a family issue?
That's it. That's actually
when did we abandon that standard? I don't know. Again, talking to good, well-intentioned conservative people, they all are trying to fix something, that is to say, school systems, that cannot be fixed. It is time to abandon that, and I don't understand why we have allowed ourselves to do that. Now, it's one thing for the federal government. Look, we all, by this point, all of us who read and think, we expect the federal government to be trying to get over and turn us into ignorant slaves that don't know how to question the things they do and sit by idly watching the Kardashians while they build brick after brick of the gulag that the United States is becoming. But why do good-hearted, conservative, Christian Americans abandon their responsibility to teach their children and hand it off to any agent of any state, any government at any level? I'm perplexed by this. I spoke to a group of kids just this past week, really great kids, I would say 80% of whom were homeschooled, and I asked the parents there, I understand the need, we must, it is a moral imperative to educate ourselves, but why have we abandoned that, surrendered that right which belongs to parents to proxies that we cannot trust in every situation?
Well, as a matter of fact, I think when I read the article in the New American Review, the New American, regarding what is going on with Common Core and how they are going out and expanding with their tentacles in every area, funding and everything else. And it looks like it's, even in the testing and the ACT and everything else, it's got its tentacles in it. It's going to be insurmountable. I think the only answer for a child to get a real education is with his parents learning what the true educational principles are and teaching it in the home, even if they're forced into the Common Core environment. And so I've always said that. Everyone always espouses the wonders of the public education and thank a teacher if you can read this. I know I could read before I went to school because my mother taught me. And we taught our children before they went to school, all 8 of them. And I can just tell you that education is in the home. It should be in the home. It should not be delegated. But if the kids do go to public schools, and some people think it's a place to have our children babysat because both parents work, and that's changed America probably more than anything. But, Joe, what is the answer? What is Common Core trying to do? Who's behind it? And how can we fight it?
Well, you mentioned that the reading, you're talking about being taught to read before you went to school. I was taught to read before I went to school. But when you read these Common Core standards, which I encourage, like I do with everything that we talk about, I encourage our listeners and viewers to go to the New American and read the Common Core articles, because they will have links to the primary documents. They have abandoned, as part of Common Core mandates, the Common Core standards mandate that with regard to language arts, that students no longer be required to read literary classics. Those literary classics have been replaced by learning to read what they call informational texts. Common Core mandates that students be taught to read using informational texts. And shall I read to you some of the suggested texts that children now are asked to be...
Instead of Huck Finn.
Instead of Huckleberry Finn, instead of the Scarlet Letter, instead of William Shakespeare, students are now expected to read, quote, recommended levels of insulation by the EPA. Strengthening federal environmental standards. Understanding Executive Order 13423.
Okay, we did bring in some humor today's show.
There you go. So I will be giving out a test this week over Executive Order 13423, and I'll expect you to all bring your government-approved pencils. Don't have them sharp, however, because you might stab someone, and if you pose a threat to me, I will have you droned to death.
In your school.
In your school, wherever I find you, I will drone
Who's
you.
behind this, and what can we do about it? And I have a real interesting question about an article that appeared in the New American, and that has to do with it. Now they're following our children from K through 12 and beyond. And they are on keeping track of everything that is being done. And that's part of this Common Core thing. And it's the tracking our children and everything they think, do, and say, Orwellian as it could be. But
one of the first articles that I wrote on this subject was about 2 years ago, maybe more. It was the standards were released in 2010 by the National Governors Association and the Council of Chief State School Officers. Anything sounds more Orwellian than that, I don't know. They released this standard in 2010. I remember writing about it in late 2010. And one of the things that caught my attention more than anything, because they dribble out these standards slowly so that states can be on the hook before they find out who's casting the line. One of the things that caught my attention was this data mining. They will require all students, K through 12, to fill out informational sheets that will contain biometric data, height, weight, race, age, names of your parents, and then they will take fingerprints. Now, of course, this is all for safety, naturally, but they will take this biometric data, but they will also require students to write down what my dad does for a living, what church we belong to, how often we go to church, what books my parents have in our home library, how often do we read these books. This is the type of data mining that the federal government is doing, and they do it for a purpose. This is not informational. This is to know and be able to recognize, categorize, and eventually contain anyone they believe to be a threat to the establishment. And if you have your child comes in there and reports that, well, Daddy works for the New American Magazine, and Mom stays at home and teaches us about God, and we read the scriptures every night, and we have books by Ron Paul in our library, and we read the works of James Madison, and we read Cicero,
and the Federalist Papers,
and the Federalist Papers, etc., then don't think that those files, that informational sheet doesn't go in a special file of future domestic terrorists.
You forgot that my dad also has guns.
Very good point. My dad, does your daddy own guns? Have you ever seen ammunition in your home? Etc. This is the data mining that's not only a part of Common Core, but it's part of several federal programs. So when your kids go to school, and this is the most important thing, they don't ask these kids to take these sheets home and have mommy and daddy fill them out or refuse to fill them out. They have 30 minutes in class. Hey, we're going to fill out some fun biographical facts, kids. Does daddy own a gun? Do you ever read the Bible at home?
There you go. And these are really actually happening now.
Absolutely.
So, well, we'll be back in a few minutes here on KHQN 1480. Welcome back. We're glad to have you here this morning with us on the New American Review with Orrin Myler, our co-host, and we also have Marler. I said Myler. I don't know why I said
That's
that.
Okay.
So, and sometimes it's Orion, and sometimes it's Orion. So
we're here with Joe, and we're back finishing up this little segment of Common Core.
Why don't you give out our phone number a couple of times, right? Our number. Wonder why we're not getting many calls this morning. Go ahead, Orion. The phone numbers are right there on that board.
Oh, there's the phone number. Our phone number is 800-776-1913. That is 800-776-1913. We'd like to hear from you if you have a question for Joe or you have a question from
Joe's
Paul.
actually getting a little bit psychotic because he hasn't had a call this morning, and we need you to call that 1-800 number, 776-1913. We need you to call that in order that we don't put Joe into some kind of an emotional...
Right. It is the only way I can prove to my parole officer that I'm actually here, if we have calls.
With his finger ready to dial, if he can just get the courage. And you just touch the number.
So give us a call, and Joe, we're going to try to finish up Common Core here in the next 2 or 3 minutes, because we want to talk about a story that boiled my blood when I read it the other day, and I reread part of it this morning, and I had to actually put down my iPad, and that has to do with the fact that the EPA, the Obama EPA, they have a war on coal, and they're going to shut down more than 200 of our coal-fired plants. We want to talk about that at the end of this segment. However, again, that brings up the question, and here's another caller, but that brings up the question as to what is behind Common Core? What is the government trying to do in nationalizing our children's education, and who's behind this?
The government is trying to make our children ignorant because an educated populace is a free populace. And one of the things and who's behind it? There are several. Your national foundations, your Carnegies, your Bill Gates, all of these people who have such an incestuous relationship with the federal government. And the goal, of course, is to distract American children, to teach them that government is the source of their rights, to teach them that war is peace, to teach them that slavery is freedom and freedom is slavery, just 1984 all over again. One of the things that I found also, besides the data mining that I found and the literacy standards that I found disturbing, is that some of the newest revelations about Common Core is that they have stripped out of approved history books the reason that that America, the colonies, fought the war for independence. That's complete. The reason is gone. It simply said that America became a free nation by defeating the British, which is complete incorrect. It's completely false. It's deceptive. Then it says that the Constitution is the source of our rights. It completely eliminates the Declaration of Independence. Never mentions it. Simply says we fought a war against England, we won, and now we're free.
And as my daughter says, it even portrays people like John Adams and Madison as just radicals who had the ability to persuade people to do things that they didn't want to do, and then portrays them as evil, bad white men. So anyway, it's a complete rewriting of history.
Absolutely, and they can. Speaking of history, they now have history texts that not only remove all of this, but you spend your senior year, for example, under Common Core, reading a textbook called A History of the U.S. that doesn't describe the history of the U.S. at all. It simply tells you about books that are written about U.S. history. It's like when I was in law school and I had constitutional law and we never read the Constitution. You'll now have history, and you'll never read history.
And I read specifically about certain authors of some of this material, and they're people who have their own agenda. They're people who don't even know history, who may never have even been in a history class from what I've seen and read of their writings. They have an agenda. They're very, very liberal people with liberal ideas, pushing an idea rather than giving an education. So what can be done about it? What can we do to prevent, if any way it can be done, to prevent this Common Core from taking... and it's already being implemented all over the place. They're already rewriting the AC at 45 states. So what can we do to get out of this and protect
first of all,
our children?
Get out of it. Force your state legislators to abandon Common Core. If you've already signed up, as Utah has, just as easy it was to pass a bill signing on to Common Core, it's just that easy to pass a bill rejecting it. And I would encourage any of the state legislators in any of the states to have that courage. If you believe the Constitution to be the law of the land, if you believe that the federal government must be restrained according to the enumerated powers, then to stand up and do something about it. Because if you are not with us, then you are against us. And as Sam Adams once said, may the chains hang lightly upon you, and may history forget that you are our countrymen. And I agree with that. And I think, second thing, and this is what makes me radical, even in my own circle, pull your kids out of the public school. If you were sending your kids every day somewhere that were teaching your children to steal, would you still send your children there? And the question is apparently yes, because our children are being taught things contrary to our values at our schools.
But be careful what you teach. You need to learn the principles yourselves. I have 3 of my children who homeschool their kids. We're considered radicals, they're considered radicals, and yet my children and my grandchildren were Sterling scholars. My grandkids are way ahead of their kids their age. But however, even now, Common Core is extending its tentacles into the homeschooling arena.
Oh, absolutely, because, and this is well, first of all, let me just say, with regard to learning the principles of freedom, yeah, you need to do that. If you're listening to this show and you don't understand the principles of freedom, get on it. This is your wake-up call. Second of all, we can do as our founding fathers once did. Not all of our founding fathers had parents that understood the timeless principles of liberty or the important things of history that they thought they needed to know, but they knew people who did, and they would get together, 4 or 5 families, 6 families in a neighborhood, and say, let's hire this guy that we know to be well-educated, and let's have him teach our kids for a couple of hours a day on these important principles. There's nothing, and that keeps the control with the parents, and that it demonstrates to kids that you care. You're not just shuffling them off to the government factory for 8 hours. You're spending your money hiring someone that you trust will teach them the principles that you agree with, and that's a glorious thing. I mean, you get the added benefit of not only being in charge of the curriculum, you get the added benefit of demonstrating to your children that when it comes to their education, when it comes to their future, nothing matters more to you. And so those are my suggestions. Now, you're talking about into the home. Common Core, and its fullest, what they call next generation standard, will empower federal education agents to go into your home, including those homes that are not part of the public school, those that are homeschooled, and evaluate the way children are being not only taught, but the way they're being raised. Are you doing those things that maintain your children's health? I see here you have a bag of Oreos, Mr. Smith. We don't encourage our children to do that. I see here you have an air conditioner. Well, that creates greenhouse gas that's killing Mother Earth. So we're going to need to go ahead and take your kids and teach them that the things in their home that they're doing are wrong. I notice you have guns in your home. That makes for a dangerous environment, and our children are important to us. So we're going to go ahead and take your kids out of your home until you're able to get rid of your guns.
And I occasionally read stories that is actually happening around the country, where they're removing children from the home, and especially homeschoolers. So. You know,
look at the history of the United Kingdom, where they've had Common Core for well over a decade now, their version of Common Core. And they have...
Now, isn't that Obamacare?
Obamacare is what people are calling. You got Obamacare, you got Obamacare. And in England, they have agents of the government that will go in homes and make sure these children are being raised right. And if they're not, they'll be temporarily placed with families that have demonstrated that they know how to raise children according to the government standards. You don't think it'll happen here? Read. Study what's happening in other places, and it will happen here.
Folks, if you don't take the steps now to do something, it's going to be too late. We've said that many, many times on the show. Unfortunately, we are going to have to move on to a topic in our last 2 minutes. There's plenty more to learn. Go to thenewamerican.com and look it up. In the last 2 minutes, let's just cover briefly what this story is that I read in the New American. Obama EPA war on coal to shut 200-plus coal-fired plants, devastating the economy. What is that all about? Who's behind it? And actually, what's going on? I mean, is this really happening? Is this really true that the current administration is regulating this industry and shutting them down?
President Obama has ordered that 285 coal-fired plants, I should say, in 32 states, be shut down because, of course, they're not reaching the federally approved standards. Principally, it's because this administration specifically, has decided to adopt the notion, the global warming agenda, the green agenda, and say that these coal-fired plants are ruining the planet. Now, time and time again, those who have studied this issue know that time and time again, this green agenda has been proven to be nothing more than fake science. But that won't do anything to the fact that when President Obama closes down these coal plants, we will be forced to send our money to our allies in the Middle East and to keep propping up dictatorships in the Middle East the way we do now.
Dependence on foreign oil. I guess that's one of the primary goals. Just real quickly, in the last 90 days, 6,571 new proposed regulations.
Not a one of them proposed by a congressman, every one of them enacted without any say-so from our elected representatives, all of them done that have the force of law, all of them created by those who are unelected and unaccountable.